my friends, just interrupt me at any point. I'll just,
I'll be like, hey.
I'll blah, 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 and then I'll be like, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, we are on the air, everyone, for the October 21st work session. We have 2 items on our agenda, both involve the same staffers, our Community Development Director, Laura Weigel, and our Planning Director, Vera Colias. They're scheduled on here as half an hour for one and an hour and a half for the other. I'm guessing they'll both end up being an hour-ish. I think there's probably more than a half an hour of discussion, sort of debriefing on the Middle Housing Town Hall. That's where we're going to start. So,
thank you, Mayor. This is going to be a bit of a tag team effort between myself, Laura, and Vera, but we're happy to be back with you. It's yesterday we were all in here for that town hall, but that was actually July 20-something. So we're here to kind of just recap a little bit of some of the themes and comments, questions, and concerns that came out of that. And then we've summarized for you in your staff report and in our deck some potential areas where council could direct the city to take on further work. I'll try to keep this very brief. You all could probably recite this yourself by now. For anyone tuning in, new to the discussion, what is middle housing? Middle housing describes housing types that are kind of between single detached homes and apartment complexes, that missing middle of housing stock. The kind of, when you dig into the definitions in state statute in our code, this includes plexes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. State law, House Bill 2001 and 2138 that was just passed this summer, both set statewide requirements for cities like Milwaukie to allow middle housing wherever single detached homes can be built. 2001 really laid the foundation for this. 2138 has kind of refined and provided further clarification. Basically, you have to both allow it anywhere single detached homes are. You also, cities can't make it more difficult. You can't treat middle housing differently than you do single family homes in order to discourage or make it harder to build. 2138 did a lot of things and it's still working its way through rulemaking. Vera has been on countless webinars and calls about this. But one big thing that I want to point out that it did, because this was a topic at our town hall, was it defined plexes as both attached and detached. There was sort of some wiggle room for cities to decide if they were or were not going to allow detached plexes. 2138 now says you have to allow detached plexes. Middle housing, I didn't get into the city code and policy here, but there is city code and policy that both predates and postdates HB 2001 that really kind of enshrines this in our local code. And it is in connection to our comprehensive plan. But as many things with planning, it takes a while for you to start seeing it happen. And so even though we're about 5 years on from HB 2001, we already have 60 units built or under construction in the city since 2020. So we're seeing a lot of nuance. I also just want to note, after our retreat, I added our little C page WS20 in the packet so you can follow along with your packet. We, as those 60 units have kind of started going through the pipeline, neighbors are taking notice and we're getting a lot more, we as staff and you as council, we're getting a lot more comments and questions about middle housing. So at the direction of council, we were asked to hold a town hall to do some education about how we got here and to hear from the community about what their questions and concerns might be. We held that in-person event here on July 28th. We also did an Engage Milwaukie page beforehand so we could start the education and start collecting some questions. Really good participation. 60 people came out and we had 35 questions or comments at the event, an additional 22 online. There's a lot that was raised there. In the packet, we put all of the summaries from both Engage and the event, but I just kind of to summarize into 5 main themes. Heard some comments about density impacts on neighborhoods. Plexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters can put more people on a lot, and that adds density. So some folks think that's a great thing and some folks don't. We heard about it both. We heard about design of middle housing as we see more of these units, and they do look a little different than single-family homes we might expect. Some questions about what can or can't the city do to regulate how these things look. We heard several comments about impacts on trees and open space. We heard some folks express their opinions about what the state has mandated in terms of where middle housing can be built, and maybe either a desire to restrict that more. And then we heard about affordability. There's, middle housing allows for smaller units to be built, which theoretically should provide a cheaper option in the housing market. I think as we see these come on, people are observing things like they're not as cheap as I thought, or is this a good way to build housing equity? Various opinions around affordability. Okay, so I'm going to pivot now, and again, if you want to follow in the packet, it's down at the bottom. I think we had 5 or 6 areas of future potential work. We are not advocating, I should say, for any of these. Yes, let's do it. There's a couple that actually are already in motion, so I'll flag those. But these are really, us trying to put ourselves in your shoes, think about the feedback you got, and think about the box we're in because of state policy and what could be done. And what we're really looking for tonight is direction on any of these. What I'd recommend for how we do this is go one by one and discuss one by one. And at the very end, I'll put them all up on the screen and I'll try to recap what I think we got as direction. Say my disclaimer now, and I'll say it again at the end. Again, these aren't endorsements, and unless I'm telling you we're already doing it, I don't have them in work plans or resource right now. So I don't want to set any expectation that if it's a direction given that tomorrow we're starting this necessarily, we're going to need some time to fold that into staff work plans and budgets. Okay, so the first one, I'll say a little bit on this, and then you've got much smarter people at the end of the table. We know there were a lot of comments and questions about space on these lots, particularly when there's detached units. So one potential area you could look at or provide direction to us to look at is to review building separation requirements for detached flexes. Vera, who again has been very heavily involved in the 2138 conversations, did talk to DLCD, and I think it's an important disclaimer that their recommendation is don't touch this. You don't want to adopt code that then becomes non-conforming as they go through rulemaking for 2138. But we didn't want to remove this from the discussion because we know it's a topic that many of you care about.
And what's their timeline for rulemaking?
January 1st, 2027.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Long time.
So, yeah, they've issued guidance, but the rulemaking is in its infancy kind of right now for that. They also have issued draft model code that is something that communities can adopt by reference, can adopt or not adopt, but the guidance is coming out that we can keep our code based, but what we would need to show is that our code is not more onerous or makes housing more expensive to build, basically, than as compared to the model code. And the model code has very, very few design standards, for example. And it's still in draft form, but it's a very pared down model code when it comes to design and development standards. So that's still working its way through. A lot of us in the region have a lot of questions about kind of the relationship between the model code and our code and just kind of how all that works and what that means. But at the moment, because rulemaking is still happening, DLCD has asked, I know you have a clear and objective code, that's great, you can still use it, but they do recommend against making any changes right now because of that we might end up being non-conforming in the other side.
But this is still a conversation worth having because at the time their rulemaking ends, we will have probably some code changes, and so we can be trying to incorporate anything we have consensus on today then? Is that kind of what we're...
I welcome your thoughts on that, Vera. I think this was one truly was we didn't want to take it out of the staff report because, again, I know it's a topic you raised at the town hall and are interested in. I think the work we do, we'd have to go into knowing we may get to January 1st, 27 and have to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I guess it's, are we having a conversation to place things on a parking lot for January
Yeah.
2027 versus
I think that's
the
a good
next
way to-
year's work plan?
That might be a great way to think about it. You could direct us to say, come January 2027, if this is still an option, then do this, and we can put that marker.
With the understanding, though, that if the idea can reduce allowable lot coverage for middle housing, then we're also doing that for single detached dwellings as well. We can't have different
Yes.
things like that. So
Yes.
that would certainly, it would reduce the amount of building available for single detached.
Yeah.
Let me throw in a somewhat related tidbit. At the LSC, I went to a panel. On that panel was President DLCD. And in that panel, she said there have been so many changes to land use in the state over the last 5 years. I just wish we would stop for a while and take a breather, because when you throw a lot of stuff at the wall, you don't know which ones actually were good and which ones were bad. Did this intelligently, you throw something at the wall and give it a little while to simmer and see if it was any good or not. So I'm not surprised by her saying, we're going to take this slow. So I thought that was an interesting comment. I went up and talked to her after the panel, and I said, I'm in the amen corner with you, Ms. Bateman.
I do just want to know, and you'll see this on a few slides, the white box. We did get a couple questions from the mayor prior to the session, so we wanted to answer those here. One was about, we talked a lot about separation. The mayor was asking, could you look at it instead about lot coverage? And as Vera said, yes, but you'd have to apply it to single detached as well. You couldn't do a special lot coverage requirement for middle housing.
Right, but we gave middle housing exceptions beyond what's single family. I mean, middle housing has lower lot coverage or higher lot coverage, lower green space requirements already than single family.
Cottage clusters, combination of cottage clusters, but not the other.
But Plex development has, and townhouse development has the same lot coverage standards. They're in the same table.
Really? So that thing on Harrison and Home? Really? Okay.
I think this is a good 27. We'll get a good sense of what rulemaking does. And it sounds like we're already going to have to revisit, is our code compliant or not? And so as opposed to committing to any specifics on a code that we don't know what the landscape will be like, I think it's good to say, I think it already would be in the work plan, but let's revisit this in 27 and see if it is true.
Sort of a constant line item of state law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are folks comfortable with that? So for this one, we put a sub-bullet under state law on the work plan, which is come January 27, check what it says about lot coverage and separation.
Yeah, I mean, I really am, I came out of the middle housing town hall, feeling like, trying to reduce the amount of lot coverage and create actual usable common space in a cottage cluster would have made some of these developments, better developments for the people who live there, as well as sort of more acceptable for the people who live nearby. So I'm a little disappointed to hear that we can't concentrate the green space in a cottage cluster so that it's an actual usable common space. I mean, I think what we see at the 8-unit thing on Olson is some nice landscaping and walkways, but nowhere for people to have a community garden plot or even just a place to all sit out and sit around a fire pit or, the things that would, the whole sort of concept of cottage cluster was, to facilitate, I don't know, community, not just to be less expensive single-family homes, I guess. So I'm a little disappointed that we don't have the ability to sort of require something usable and shareable by way of common space there.
Well, this is where I kind of think that we're approaching it the wrong way in some of these staff reports. I don't understand why we're not having a conversation. I mean, a lot of this is premised from what can we require? The state has bound our hands and we can't require a lot. But I would love to have a conversation about what we could incentivize to that end. Like, are there extra incentives that we could apply to developers who develop actual green space more meaningfully in a cottage cluster or in other developments? I think that that might be one, permissible under the state law and in compliance with the page. And I think gets at what we're hearing from residents where they really want to see green space.
I think that would be it'd be a little tricky. We can think about it a little bit. The incentives are usually kind of like, you give people smaller setbacks, or you actually, the incentives kind of would maybe not get you what you were looking for. And I don't think that they would build anymore. I don't think they would build it. Like, I don't know what those incentives would be,
Sure.
I guess is like my convoluted way of coming around. I don't know. what those
A
incentives would
bonus
be.
for more open space?
Well, I think so, yeah. So I think part of the cottage clusters are, they have their own separate section of the code. They're their own thing, right? They already have very small setbacks. I mean, the rear yard setback is only 10 feet, for cottages, it's 5 feet on the side. They're limited in height because they're supposed to be cottages, so they're 25 feet, 2 stories. So they're already supposed to be shorter. They're limited by square footage. The whole idea was that they're supposed to be small. The common area is math. It has to be a minimum of 15 feet wide, and you have to have 150 square feet per cottage. And it has to actually already be a concentrated area. It only counts if it meets, the width requirement. I think so what we're seeing is there's a square. I mean, there is a common green. It's getting developed in such a way that, it meets the minimum standards, and it's designed in such a way that everyone has like a little front-ish area that's shared, but they're not developing it with a community garden or with a fire pit or anything. I totally understand that, but so those are extra design requirements that that we can't put in there. How they use that green space is something that, it's math. It just is. Sometimes we might get one that's developed differently, that has a bigger green space, and uses it differently, which would be great. So I think we're back to how are we incentivizing it when a cottage cluster already has a lot from a developer standpoint. It has higher lot coverage. It has a lot of things that already help do that. So how are we, what lever are we pulling to do those things?
I have a question, because when we did the affordable housing incentives, developers would still have to abide by our tree code. Does middle housing code do the same thing?
Yeah.
So is there a way to tie it into our tree code?
I mean, I think what you're kind of getting at, Adam, yeah, you could increase, you could say you have 50% tree canopy. You could also change your lot coverage standard, and you could say we need to have more lot coverage, but it would just have to apply to all. It would have to apply to single family and middle housing. Cottages would still be.
I know the tree code is.
The incentives that I didn't hear talk about, do we don't control our parks STCs at all?
No.
Okay. We only control stormwater, and I wonder if there is something. I got the parks STC because when we talked about transportation STCs, we said maybe we discount it based on your proximity to transit, or close to transit, and you're going to use that more, so you have a lower STC. I wonder if there's some type of financial incentive or fee or something that could be waived to encourage more green space. And I also wonder, I've heard of other cities doing different review processes for different types of development. So as opposed to having to do design reviews through the planning commission or other things, you do it between the city attorney and your attorney.
Well, in the case of most of the middle housing that we're seeing, it doesn't go through planning commission at all. It's allowed by right, so.
With any exception, it's all done through the building permit, so there's no interaction with us. So,
Yeah.
Do you have any sense that are there, I mean, they're business people, so I assume they're kind of drawing lessons from what seems to sell and what doesn't, but, those 8 units on all of a sudden, not a single one is sold. So, and after a $40,000 price drop. Do you think the developers are looking at, is there a network of developers of middle housing developers who are talking about design and what sells or what's, I
don't know the answer to
expect
that
you to really
question,
know.
but I feel like it's just, we're so early in it, right? We're seeing it, we're in it right now. Like they're throwing it out, they're putting a price on it. And even when there's a bunch in Portland that I drive by and they've been for sale since I've been riding my bicycle by there, right? And so
Right.
it'll just be really interesting. I mean, we're trying this new concept. It's a new idea. Nobody's tested this yet.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see, I would say in the next year, we'll start to understand if people are going to, like right now, we're still seeing stuff come in. It has not
Yeah.
slowed down.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting over the next year and a half to see if, in fact, there is a shift in the market because we're not sure the market's actually there. I don't know the answer to the question.
I think
It's
you're-
still so early.
I think you're right though, Mayor. I think, there's levers we can pull, but frankly, the market will also, I think the market might start incentivizing itself some different things. Think about when skinny homes were all the rage prior to, and I feel like there were tons of those built. Now you don't see a lot of them. Well, you kind of do with the plexus, but you get what I mean, because I think the market was like, oh yeah, this is how I can get best bang for my buck. And then they weren't all that popular. So,
Oh, and it's $500 a square foot, so it's not really. a deal.
I guess so here's what I'm hearing. In terms of reviewing code, I've heard at least 2 of you say, let's put a pin in that until January 2027. Anyone disagree with that?
Well, I guess my point is, let's figure out what things we want to pursue, and let's not just put a pin in this whole
Yes,
conversation until 2027.
No.
Let's figure out which ones we think
Yes.
we want to pursue when
Yeah.
the time is right.
Sure, okay. And then on the incentivization, we can put some time to that and look at that, but I'll offer my opinion is, as Laura said, we're still so early in the market right now that I don't know if we're going to glean a lot by kind of throwing more incentive. I think you might want to kind of see how the market plays out before we start thinking about levers to pull on the incentive front, before you start giving away STCs. But that is my
Well, yeah.
editorial.
What's the normal processing period for applications or permits for cottage housing? I guess I'm wondering if the incentive could be that there's more of a hands-on, and a shorter period of time for review, rather than giving up SDCs, but rather that gives us maybe a little bit more opportunity to be involved in the conversation about how these projects are developing. And then the incentive to the developer is that it gets done faster.
It really, I think that mostly the development gets done as fast as the developer can do it on a certain level, because it's still a pretty quick timeline. Where it's not going through a land use process, so they're just going through the permitting process. And so at a certain level, I think that the capacity of development services staff is running at a pretty quick clip. And I don't know that we're slowing down projects through our, not that I know, but I could definitely talk to development services and see if that we're actually slowing it down. It's more comes from the, it comes from both sides, I guess, but I would want to understand that a little. Sure. Yeah.
One, I like where you're coming from, Counselor, but I think the reality of making everything be allowable by right and not have the planning process is, by the time they come to us with permits, they're so baked into what they want to do, right? They have, it's permits, so it's pretty baked. So that's the kind of dilemma we have with the current world of.
To go fast, we've lost some touch points.
Yeah, we've lost some touch points to be able to influence it.
So the only type of incentive that would be feasible would be SDCs? There's not
I think we can look at some stuff. We could look at, we could look, we could look at like height bonuses and those kinds of things, but that's, I think you guys are
But maybe on the flexibility,
Maybe on the-
it's gonna get
really tall
Yeah.
with,
with not much more I bet, as far as green space goes.
here's one thing we could do. I mean, we could in conversations with developers as these come through, ask the question. What would encourage you to do more green space here? And kind of do a little bit of fact finding, and it's like, oh, you gave me a reduction on my stormwater SDC, maybe that, or this, or that,
Yeah, I'll build you a fire pit if you give me another floor. A pretty easy trade-off.
Is anybody interested in seeing how we can tie it to the tree code? That seems like our biggest leverage right now.
Saying you get more flexibility with the tree code if you.
Well, I'm saying to basically mandate more of the open space that we're asking for. We can't incentivize it because they already have to follow our tree code, right? So there's already a tree canopy requirement.
So
Somehow
you're
tie the
saying
open
up
space
the
to
tree
that.
canopy requirement, like.
I'm saying that's an option. I'm saying look into it and see what our options are. Maybe we can say 20% of it could be open space, or 10% could be open space, 30%. I mean, I would rather kind of increase it just because I know we're already behind on our tree canopy goal of 40%, and I don't know how we're going to meet that. But I'm just saying, I think there's multiple options within the tree code that could mandate more of that open space that we're asking
The
for.
requirement on these projects is 60% right now?
No, it's the tree code canopy requirement is the same across all of the projects.
We also heard that the tree code, don't weaken it. We heard at the town hall, they wanted us to strengthen it. So I'm just saying that kind of fits what we're looking to do. It's worth looking into it if
But if we
others
did that,
agree.
everyone had to do it everywhere.
Yes.
Except for cottages, right, but I mean,
You have to do it uniformly across the city.
right.
Well,
So
maybe.
I guess
anything we do have to be
I've always been skeptical that we're requiring enough,
open space.
enough space for trees to really grow to get to that 40% canopy anyway, so I kind of like your thinking, but I mean, that is a big change.
Maybe what we say is, you hear a lot of counselors who are interested in this idea, and I think we're hearing from staff. Maybe you're like, well, I love your interest, but I don't know how feasible that is. This is something that we're interested in exploring to maybe bring back as we continue to have this conversation. But even just seeing, I love the idea of a signal for developers, even if like the development shortened timeline, even if it's something we're already kind of meeting, something that shows developers a signal, this is what we want you to do. I think it's helpful because at no point in the process am I seeing a spot where if you're a developer looking at Milwaukie to build something that says we want you to build more green space or what that looks like outside of our tree canopy.
Could we, and this is just is this possible? Is this allowable by state law? Could we increase canopy requirement for new construction? And yes, both middle and single family, but not change it in terms of additions to existing houses or other things like that.
So it already is triggered by new dwelling units. So that is what triggers tree code requirements. So if someone were just building an addition, then they don't have that canopy requirement. Obviously, if the addition is impacting an existing tree, it's but the requirement to meet that 40%. And I'm not trying to pretend I'm the forester here, but it's the new dwelling unit is what triggers the compliance with the tree code now.
And we'll talk tree code in a bit, but I do, tree code and open space go together, but they aren't quite the same thing. I mean, I think you might, what I've heard you kind of say, Mayor, is maybe the 40% is actually adequate, but it is that coverage, or lot coverage. It's like space on the lot, which if you then up your tree canopy coverage, they're having to plant trees there, you might get less fire pittage and common area.
Well, since we brought up incentives, it's not really this question of, but I did want to, I do think we want to think about incentives generally, and so we're going to come back with a conversation about that. So we got a letter from someone about co-housing. I think we allow co-housing now. There's nothing in our code that would prohibit co-housing, but is there something we could do to incentivize co-housing? I do think co-housing is a good, sort of a middle income strategy. And it kind of relates to condos, which we now have a slightly better state law on condos. So is there anything to incentivize co-housing? And I guess, this is going to be, the other one that I think about is I hear that Sherwood, for example, has created some zones for cottage clusters, but they're limited to 1 story. Now, I don't know, I've also heard other people say that actually doesn't pass muster with the state law, so I don't know. But it does seem to me in this day of, more people wanting to age in place, there's some value to trying to incentivize some single-story cottages. And
Well, you're limited to the 900 square feet though, so. Right, and
Yeah.
so that would,
yeah,
But the overall square footage of the home on average is 1,400. So you can still do 2 stories. And we have them that are 1,000, 1,100 square feet, but it's still a lot of footprints of 1,500 square feet because they do those too. So, yeah, those stories.
that's not a huge, I think about that. I think about the cottage cluster as being an appealing idea for people who are wanting to downsize from a bigger home and then therefore put a new home on the market. But there are people for whom the 2-story is not, workable. So I just wanted to put that sort of question on the table.
Condo zoning. Could you do zoning for condos?
Condo is a form of tenure. So it's, the Bolton Street Cottage Cluster is a condominium development, actually. So it's, we don't zone for type, they elected to not do a middle housing land division. So they built it with the infrastructure for a condominium. Jamie Stengel's development on 40th is rental. So it wouldn't be split up either as a middle housing land division because they don't have the infrastructure, the pipes aren't laid out for that. But we're getting a bunch of middle housing land divisions for cottages and for clusters too. But we don't tie zoning to, ownership, rental, condominium, that kind of thing. Those are separate kind of situations. Yeah.
So I think this was great to move into incentives, and it's more connected to what was sort of our second potential area, which was really around design standards, is kind of what I had taken away from the town hall. Vera can explain this way better than me. There's like 10 design standards, you have to hit 5 of them, something like that, blah, blah, blah. We could look at that. But if we look at that, we have to look at it for everything. Can't just do it for middle housing. And then we put, Mayor, your kind of 2 questions about incentives on this slide too, because I think incentives and design or design interests, they kind of go hand in hand. But I would love, so I think what I've heard is that you'd like us to come back with maybe a little more thinking on the incentive side. But is there any specific thing on design standards? This is like eaves and windows.
Personally, I'm not inclined to revisit design standards. It sounds like the state may push us there. But those were those were long negotiated before the planning commission. And, I feel like we have a modest requirement of design standards that gets us more than just a box with flat front and, limited number of windows, without, requiring people to do things that are elaborate. So, I feel like we've struck a good balance on design standards personally.
Differing opinions on that?
No.
Okay. But do we have a kind of majority wanting us to do some deeper thinking on incentives?
Yeah, I think so.
I guess the thing I would say on this incentives, 2138 talked about SROs as their form of co-housing, and they gave 2 incentives. They reduced the number of parking spaces that you need and reduce the number of, or your density limit. They count as like a third of the density of a normal unit. And those are kind of maybe less relevant to R&D zone, but if we're talking about incentivizing SROs just across the city, maybe we look at our density limit and just removing them to having to meet the density limit, or we even look at like in our SDCs for stormwater, or like even our sewer SDCs, a shared kitchen space uses less water or less like sewage than 4 different kitchens. And so I maybe think about those for the SRO sort of incentives. And then I do kind of like, I mean, the condo conversation, or I can stop it.
Well, the SROs aren't really middle housing, so that's kind of opening up a different kind of section of the code. So I just wanted to be sure that was clear. And if anybody else wanted to talk about SROs.
Are SROs, I mean, aren't they allowed?
They are. Oh, yeah, they are. They're just not middle housing. They're not different kind of.
Council President, are you saying they'll apply like those kinds of incentives that are for SROs that the state has considered or has put in 2138, consider putting that in for middle housing?
I guess when Joanna emailed about co-housing, I was thinking of more of an SRO sort of model. I guess I don't know the difference between an SRO cottage cluster versus an SRO apartment, but I do think that the logic of SROs is kind of consistent. If you have a shared fill in the blank space, you don't have 4 kitchens, you just have 1 or whatever.
I mean, do you imagine any of our cottage clusters with a building that has the community kitchen and space, and that the units themselves actually don't have the full kitchen? Maybe they just have sort of a kitchenette, but that the meals and the bigger cooking situations are all happening in the community space. That, the co-housing intentional community, that's sort of how it's set up, right? So I think the SDCs would follow in that, because it's, it's based on fixture count and all of those things, probably.
Sure. Okay.
So I think it's a good question. I don't know how SDCs would be calculated, because if you don't have full kitchens in those units, then what's the definition of a dwelling? Is it actually only 1 dwelling, even though there's 12? I don't know. So those are good questions.
I actually I used to live in one of those.
Generally, when we think of those, it's cottage cluster, we think of those as
Down in Southern Oregon.
multifamily
Exactly.
housing.
But that's sort of idea of only 1 row. Yeah.
The one I used to live in with my older cousin down in Southern Oregon. And what they would have is, it's basically, there was 2 rooms on each side. They were just rooms. There was nothing else in them, just a bedroom, basically. And then each had a door, and in the middle was the kitchen, and it was a full kitchen. And then across from that, they each had a bathroom. So the two on this side shared that bathroom, the 2 on our side shared that bathroom. But it was almost like a 4-bedroom apartment, and the kitchen was in the middle.
Yeah.
And then a bathroom on each side.
Did you ever ask your property manager what they paid in SDC?
I was still in high school, so.
So
So is that a no?
just for my edification, I guess. I mean, I don't think we need SROs in Milwaukie, but I gather Portland has some, so maybe you guys hear about them at, your regional tables. But, I mean, co-housing is an intentional community. People co-own it. An SRO could be that, but it could also be a landlord, right? Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that correctly.
But just sort of form the model of what it is, not sort of the ownership piece of it, but just kind of how many units and where's the kitchen, and how many kitchen. I mean, it's an interesting thought, and I don't know that we've talked about it from an SDC situation. If somebody came with one of those ideas, we'd have to talk about it. So it's a good question, and I think it's worth just sort of understanding what that means.
Yeah.
If it's a conversation to have with.
Okay.
There's a lot of residential, like the transition from going from one type of housing to another, coming out of homelessness. There's lots of facilities where it's a house, everybody shares the facilities, but the property manager, but all the people are participating in that. I've been in several of them, and so it's shared kitchen, shared bathrooms, that kind of thing. Like a house.
It's a lot of stuff in between. Yeah.
So just keeping an eye on the clock and our other long conversation for this work session. I think I would summarize this one as do some more thinking on incentives and bring something back, but I'm not hearing a call from a majority to look at design standards specifically. Okay. Vera, did you want to talk a little bit about the mayor's question around incentivizing attached units?
No, it was a good question, and I think just to So this idea of attached units versus detached units, detached plexes and so on. So townhouses are a form of middle housing, really specific, attached single-family homes, because they are each already on its own lot, they're connected, and they have frontage on a public street. So 52nd and Jackson is a townhouse development. But we also have attached plexes that kind of look like townhouses because they're just designed that way. And I just wanted to show that there's a couple of different ways this really affects, I think, our deep lots, backlot development, the idea of houses being in backyards sort of idea. And one of the things that we've been talking about here, so the photo on the right is actually off of Duke in Portland. I pass it every day. But this was basically a private drive, and they're attached units. So they but they're not facing Duke, they're facing the private drive. Just as an illustration of the image on the left is a site plan that someone was, they're still sort of workshopping, we had a pre-app about it off of Lake Road. The idea being that they're building a private drive, but all the units, they would divide the property, but there are 3 quadplexes turned sideways facing the private drive. There's a bunch of things that our code is set up that units face the street, the public street, not sideways facing the private drive. So in this case, there's a bunch of variances and things that would need to be set up because everything's sideways. So what feels like a side yard setback is really a front or a rear yard setback. So it's sort of, our code doesn't facilitate this kind of development. But I'm showing, so we're still working through what all of that means. But it's something to explore, this idea of creating code that encourages this kind of backlot development where you're sort of setting up a drive where you have the houses actually facing the drive, not the street. It does mean that you have, your front house is sideways to the public street. It's kind of creating a fake corner lot, basically. If you can go to the next slide. So this, we have a site plan, the front of a house, and then the side of the house. This is a detached triplex. But that top, the larger photo, that elevation is actually what's facing the public street. And that meets our design standards. So we have street side setback, street side yard design requirements. It's kind of about where the front door is and what sort of looks like the front of the house. In this case, all of these units are facing towards a drive. Again, they're not facing towards 53rd. So you don't have kind of your traditional front of house facing the street. So what's the relationship of a sideways development, with the public street? But it's, it is a detached plex, but it's set up differently than the ones we've seen where everybody's sort of facing forward. They're creating a drive and everybody's facing sideways. I'm just using these as examples of kind of different ways that the detached plex that I know that folks have been experiencing on Harrison, they're sort of all set up to face Harrison Street and yards, but they also don't have a driveway. There are different ways that we can develop these backlots, and it's something that the code would need to facilitate if this is something that we think is interesting, this idea of a private street or a private drive. Are we creating private streets in these sort of corners with something that kind of looks like a street? Maybe it has a sidewalk on it, but we're not responsible for it. It's not a public street. The utilities, everything is private, but it sort of sets up a different way of building the backlots as opposed to what we've been seeing,
I could have sworn, because I go down Harvey like every day on my drive back to work. I could have sworn there's an older development that's like that, where there's a couple houses on this side and then on this side, they're facing each other. And you pull into the drive.
No, there might be, maybe those are flag lots that got developed and they're actually, we allow things to face sideways. I think the idea of what we're.
It's really similar like this.
Yeah,
That's the
so, it's something that we could be more, if this is something that we want to think about. We actually develop standards specific to this kind of sort of townhouse looking, but sideways.
I like it because if you're on a more busier street, like one of those cut-through streets, then it can get pretty busy. Having it set up like this, at least is a little bit safer for kids if they're playing out front, as opposed to, if it was facing, some of those.
Well, it's also less curb cuts into the street,
Yeah.
right? So it is probably safer.
The trade-off is that you don't have a house that looks like it's facing the street. You basically cut into it, so you lose a little bit of fabric.
It doesn't look street. It looks nice though. in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth exploring. I guess yeah. And that is, I mean, you brought it up in response to my question about townhomes.
Right.
But it's, nothing about that requires them to be attached, right?
No, it doesn't. These were just the examples that, I happen to know about, but if you, not the next slide, but the next one. So this is another way that we're doing, this is an attached triplex on Monroe Street. The middle image is the front unit because it actually does face Monroe. And then the other two that are behind it are sideways. This is something that we're seeing, there are lots of examples in Portland, but they don't have a driveway. I mean, there isn't any, there's just a sidewalk that kind of goes back to those two back units. But this is a pretty classic triplex that has a relationship with the street, looks like a house, and then the other two are behind it. So this is a really small lot. It's less than 3,800 square feet, but they're able to kind of fit everything, on there for lot coverage and trees and everything, which is kind of wild. But it's another example of different ways to kind of create that front and sideways. So there are multiple ways.
Yeah, I know a lot like that in Selwood.
But I think these wider, really deep ones that where you do have room to create a drive, it's just, we haven't, the situation, though, is different because of the way the yards are established. I was talking to a couple of other communities, and I think one of the things is that private drive establishes the front yard. That's the difference. And otherwise, we have lots of variances. Like that Lake Road example has a lot of variances, because they're oriented differently. The lots aren't deep enough because they're all set up sideways. So it's just something from a code perspective to figure out, is this something that we want to see? And what does that front unit's relationship like with Lake Road, in this example, it's the side.
And the private drives have to be enough to allow fire access.
They still have to meet all those minimum standards, for access and that kind of
So I would guess there aren't that many potential places to do this, or do you think there are a lot?
There are some. There are definitely some that could lay out this way. But it's, again, I just wanted to show sort of the different ways as a response to the detached plex idea that there might be a way to get a few more units, but the trade-off is for that sideways kind of facing situation.
Well, I guess I'd also wonder, to be responsive to the green space that people have been asking for, do the private drives all have to be actual drives? Could they be some type of common area, kind of like we see in cottage clusters? Or could you allow more than just a driveway? Could you allow some type of green space that they could orient to, or something?
Nothing precludes someone from doing that.
I guess if we're considering this, I want to be flexible enough that maybe we could allow both, because I do think, looking for that green space wherever we can.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I assume that the
Setback.
people that want to build the private drives are wanting to build parking.
Because
that's why
they all have
they're
garages.
putting a
All of
garage.
those units have garages.
The sidewalk, and there would be tree canopy, and there would be the front yard setback. So you get all of it.
Yeah.
But like this example, you're saying they're not, it'll just be a walkway.
So because they're not.
There's no, there aren't any garages. There's no parking.
Okay, I'm just going to keep us moving, and then we'll recap again at the end. So this one can be fast. It was because this is already, we're doing it. I think a big kind of theme was just there's a code element of this, a code compliance element of this, and as middle housing developments come up, we get a lot more calls. And so you guys know about some of the moves already underway. Code compliance is moving from public safety into community development, and we'll report directly to Laura. So I think that alone is going to make a big impact on knitting together development services and code. But, and credit to the mayor who really followed up with this idea that we think is great. We're developing at least one, but maybe a few communication materials, including like a checklist that gets given to developers but can also be made available to neighbors. It's very just clear, okay, this has been permitted. This is what code they have to follow. If you have concerns about this, here's who you call. Here's who you call after hours, just to really demystify what can sometimes be a really like wonky and multi-departmental mosaic of code stuff. So that's coming. When it's ready, I'll make sure we share it with all of you.
Awesome.
This one,
Well, is that a tip sheet or a checklist? Because I think of the checklist as being something different that, you know, you're going down there, this is done, this is done, this is done, this is done.
that's a good question. It's probably more of a
There's probably two different
thing.
things
Yes,
that will result from that one thing that gets developed.
yes. Maybe one thing that's more a checklist for developers. Have you done all the things?
Yeah.
But then also that, okay, you've done all the things. Here's the tip sheet then for them going forward as they construct and for the neighbors about who to call and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. Good comment.
Two different audience, just being aware of our audience going development.
Yeah.
Well, I'm on the city council, so I just think of other things for you to do.
I love it. So this one, we've talked about a couple times, and this can get wonky, so I'm gonna try to keep it kind of high level. When people develop stuff in general, we like to require developers to build right-of-way improvements. It's the most cost and resource effective way and efficient way for the city to get infrastructure improvements. If a street calls for a sidewalk and someone's building something, make them build the sidewalk. Win-win. Right now, our code is written where developers can request fee lock, fee in lieu of construction. And it's just been a little bit hit and miss. Like I will speak from personal experience. Someone who just built something in my pre-app, fee lock came up, and so I didn't really request it, but it came up and then we wanted to do it. And so we did it. And I think it's been a little more like conversational than like a black and white, we do, we don't, we do it in these cases and not in these cases. So one idea that came out of this middle housing conversation is we see more middle housing and we sort of see it in A, places where streets are non-standard, and we B, see it in places where people are like, I think this is going to cause a lot of issues, but I don't know what those issues are yet. The idea was, should we be more proactive about saying, let's take fee lock instead of an improvement? The benefit of that is, you get a little more time to sort of see how things play out and decide what the right need is. Some streets are non-standard and we get some flack sometimes for sidewalks to nowhere when we require a sidewalk and maybe that street is never going to have sidewalks or it'll take 400 years for it to have sidewalks. So that's maybe the pros of moving this direction. I wouldn't be a good city manager if I didn't tell you some cons. I don't want you to think FELOC is this big cash cow. It's really not. It's little nominal, again, my development, it's $5,000. I gave the city $5,000. To be honest, they would have had a better deal if I had built the sidewalk to nowhere. But it's something. And then two, I think doing this right does require program management and oversight. Laura and I and Peter have kind of talked, like, you probably need someone who sits between development services and public works and sees that FELOC pot of money and watches the city and is like, okay, I'm seeing 2 developments here and the gravel on the side is getting weak. Maybe we do something there. But that's high touch. That's not just put it into a CIP project. That's very much whack-a-mole and figure it out. So I would like some direction from you all. If this is a place you'd like the city to go, we can start putting together the budget and the staff pieces to try to flush this out. But if you say no, keep building sidewalks or having developers build the stuff, then I will pause on that work.
So I think this may need to be its own discussion because I think it's a bigger discussion. I will tell you, over my now, I guess, 11th year on council, we have had different conversations about FELOC at different junctures. And I feel like this council hasn't really had that. And so there's sort of like a kind of a FELOC 101, maybe.
It could be a study session.
Could be a study session. I personally am a fan of make them build it. Sidewalk to nowhere is okay. I have a sidewalk that I had to build and it ends, it's not to nowhere. It goes to the corner on one end, but on the other end it ends because my neighbors don't have a sidewalk. Kids come out and use it. I mean, everybody likes to walk on it, and the people with little kids bring their kids with their big wheels to learn to ride because it's the one place that's off the street to ride. And I have seen sidewalks incrementally get built. And I will tell you, there's a block over by Water Tower Park where that happened, where like a corner lot built one, and then a lot, midway back the block built one. And then, anyway, I have seen them fill in or close to filling in where it leaves a little bit for the city to fill in without having to do a whole big project. I think the other piece of conversation in here is we have people who have these non-remonstrance agreements, people who got out of building back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, with an agreement to, contribute to sidewalks if sidewalks were ever built on their streets. And we have a map of those somewhere. And there's about 100 or 120, as I recall. And will we ever, will we do anything with those? Will we expect people to live up to their and they are on people's titles, I think, in some cases. They are on people's, it comes up when they sell the house and stuff.
Send it to collections.
Do folks, I like the suggestion, Mayor, of maybe a study session on this topic. This is a big one. You guys okay with
Yeah,
that?
I'm good with that because I do also think, because right now there's, because I've heard from some people in Milwaukee about the sidewalks. If the sidewalk's damaged and somebody gets injured, is it the property owner who's in front of that sidewalk, or is it on the city if they were to take legal action or sue us? Who's responsible for maintaining the sidewalk?
Maintenance is on the adjacent property owner.
So then they would probably, if there was any lippage or damage or buckling and somebody was to hurt themselves, the homeowner's responsible for that? I'd like to talk about that too.
Yeah, I think we have to understand the nuance of that, because I'm just thinking about my neighborhood and how there's sidewalks, the trees, right? The trees are busted through all of the sidewalks. So,
Yeah, how
you're
are
just
you
walking
gonna-
along a sidewalk that's completely hazardous. And so I don't know what the legal.
Yeah.
You could sue the whole neighborhood for that.
I in COVID in 2020, summer of 2020, I face planted on an uneven sidewalk in Ladd's Addition. It was after dark. I was walking with a friend. I'm walking along and suddenly I'm face down to the pavement. And I had terrible black eyes. It was not pretty. I had to go to Zoom care and during COVID where, you all had to mask and it was kind of craziness. I didn't sue anybody over it. I think to some degree that's your,
Well, I got an example too. I got a buddy that walked downtown.
pardon?
Walk at will. right?
Yeah. I feel like it's part of living in an urban environment is those things happen. So.
Well, I got a buddy that walked downtown Portland. And in front of a church, same thing. Tripped over the buckle, smashed his face, broke his tooth, cut into his lips. He had some damage. He couldn't really afford to pay for all that, so he had to sue the church. So the church had to settle with him to pay all his dental, or it was either the church or the city. One of them came in and paid the damages. But for example, you know what I mean? That's another example where it's what if you don't have a choice? Where the only way you can fix what happened to you is by holding the person responsible for that to financial responsibility.
I know I'm a one string of this along, but the one thing I'll say on VLOC, we have TSP classifications that I think should be really good to incorporate into our VLOC system. If we're looking at spots where you should not be able to do VLOC, that classification map I think would be good as a first pass. The one caveat that I'd add is a street like 29th is a neighborhood walkway, but that's more of a Blue North style street. So making sure you incorporate those distinctions, our classification map really doesn't say what will be a Blue North or not. And so
It's like you're
there's some
bugging our
systems.
staff meetings, Council President, because we've been talking about that exact topic. Yeah, there's going to need to be a public works standards update that occurs after the TSP is adopted, and FELOC really needs to be tied to your public works standards because it's actually law. You can't tell someone pay. You have to tell them how you calculated what you're charging them, and that needs to be based on a standard. So we're on it.
Oh, we talked about this in the retreat. Leave staff alone.
Stop bugging their meetings.
So just kind of moving us forward, I kind of talked about this one in addition to the development, sort of communications, code compliance, we're increasing it. We've moved it to CD. I'm going to move us forward because we're running out of time, but if there's any specific code compliance things you want to see, please let us know as Laura takes the helm of that.
Well, I will just say, we have a fairly small staff compared to like Happy Valley and other cities. But one thing that's been talked about on and off over the years is an actual property maintenance code and having, right now it's, well, anyway, I'll just put that on the table as something to talk about as we think about, the future of code compliance.
Yeah. It's in the talks.
Very good conversation.
Yep. Okay, two last things. On the code compliance front, parking. So parking is one of those ones where we're hearing a lot of concerns and anxiety. I don't know if we've necessarily seen, because a lot of these places are still in construction, I don't have data for you on, yes, this Plex opened and now we have no on-street parking. It's more of a concern about what's coming in the future. Thankfully, our historian mayor knew that 10 years ago, we had adopted a traffic reg that enables neighborhoods to request neighborhood parking management. Now, this really wasn't about residential development. This was about the max. And it was about trying to make it so that residents have priority on the street. They all get permits. If you're not a resident and you're parking in a neighborhood to jump on the max, you might need a permit. But it gives us the bones of some parking management. I guess the city has some neighborhood parking management reg. We could explore opportunities for more proactively telling people about this. It's never been taken up, by the way. That reg has never been implemented. We could do other things. My considerations there are, we aren't seeing really the barging on the door asking for this, and it is resource intensive. We'd have to figure out how we administer those permits, how we monitor those, and then how we do the enforcement.
So that would result in a cost increase on the people are going to have to pay for it, right?
Yes. So I guess is there appetite right now or desire right now for us to look more at parking management, or is this something you want to monitor and return to later?
We heard some, we've heard concerns about that. I think the answer is we tell them, we have this. Maybe we massage the program to, I don't know. I feel like there will be a day when we need that. I'm not sure we're at that day yet.
Well, although we've heard some things, I'm not sure, how widespread those concerns are. I don't really know how sticky they are. Are they in every neighborhood? Is it isolated and that kind of thing? So I think that this might be, an issue, and maybe it's not even an issue for right now, but maybe that's one where we do a little bit more comprehensive survey, maybe engage Milwaukie at some point. Because I'm just not sure it's there yet.
Yeah, I think it's all designed to be an area that asks for it, and it applies in that area. It's not, and ever was intended to be citywide or anything. But I think these places that have one 8-plex or, one sort of middle housing development that's bringing in 8 or 10 units on a street, I think that will absorb and work itself out. But when you have the second or the third on a block, there's going to be a day when we're probably going to need it.
And I'm, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we could point people towards 470. The problem is 470 wouldn't, right now as written, everyone who lives in that plex would get a permit. Mm-hmm. And so it might stop their friend from being able to park on the street when they visit. But so, yeah.
There's a ton of
people that live on that street, that if anybody wanted to park on the street, they would need to have, if they live there, they would need to have a permit. Mm-hmm. So then that would apply to the people who want to park on the street.
I lived in Washington, D.C.
It's kind of crazy.
For years, and we had there are ways to deal with that, but it is a staff lift for sure. I mean, we had zoned parking permits in different parts of town. I was in zone 2, and if you had a guest, if they came on the weekend, they were probably okay.
4-hour period or something.
Yeah. And otherwise, if you had a guest who was going to be there over multiple nights, you went to the police station and you got a guest pass, you know? I mean, there are ways to do it, but it is a lift.
Yeah. One just update for you, and we found out today, thank you, Council President, for asking, that our traffic regs weren't available to the public on the website, and Scott is a magician and made it happen. So now they are all available. So, I mean, at the very limited, and at least we can point people there, but I'm not hearing like we must create a revamped parking program today, but maybe a monitor, gather some more information.
The thing I'll say in this is, I think your point about everyone getting a free permit, like there are some, you said massaging, I kind of agree with that. There's even a preamble in it that says for commuters or to help alleviate commuters parking. And so is there a small thing that we could do to make sure the program's ready when people want it? Maybe I'm fine for the guidance from staff to be, this isn't the time now, but I do think we should send it out. And I know as I've been talking to, I'm doing a town hall in Ardenwald, and I've been talking to some folks there, and like people on 40th are like, where that first middle housing development came in, say that there are too many cars parking on 40th now. But I could see there being some neighborhoods or blocks that maybe are interested, but then it gets to, well, they get 51% of signatures, but I guess that engagement maybe is a good first piece that we should definitely do.
I think that a lot of this is just, things are changing. And people are used to being able to park in front of their house, or to be able to park, in front of Foxy's or wherever. And, they were just used to, like if they had something to do in town, they could get in front of their house, they could go to the business they wanted to, they could go to their friend's house, and there was a parking spot right there. Okay, now it may be half a block away. So, it's just different, I think. I remember hearing people like 5 or 6 years ago talking about the horrible parking downtown, and I went, what? What are you talking about? And so I think that there's some perception issues going on there. That's why I say I'm not sure we're at that point yet where we implement these, but I think it's a good thing for us to think through. And, I'm not against people paying for it. Some fee.
We paid in DC, we paid something. It wasn't free.
It's not a huge amount, but it's something.
It looked like there was, at least in the code, it had said that we have to put it into our fee structure, I'm forgetting the name, our fee schedule. Yes. So I think it presumes some type of fee, but I do think even like, are you parking one car? Are you parking 2 cars? Is there some extra, like the details like that maybe it is adopting it into our fee schedule for years to come proactively? Maybe that's too much.
I don't.
Probably needs some work before we think about putting it in our fee schedule, but I will say, I mean, I kind of also think the complaints are overblown. I do think I think Olson Street, because of the popularity of Milwaukie Cafe, and especially if the street thing across the block, I mean, you see in neighborhoods, no parking. You see people trying to create their own no parking zone. And, it's on my block. There's a few of them. People trying to prohibit parking. We're going to keep seeing that. We're going to have some complaints, but have we reached the critical mass to deploy a project like this? I don't really feel like we have it. I'll tell you, yesterday, because I saw we have the North Ardenwald project in on our consent agenda, and I thought, I need to go see that. So I went over, drove through, and of course, most North Ardenwald are small streets because it is that shared street. But I think it was Boyd, which I happened to go down, which is super wide. Like, it's so funny. We have one street, super narrow Sherritt and, Roswell. And then Boyd is like super wide. There was not a single car parked on Boyd. Not a single car. It was 10:30 in the morning, so people who go somewhere for daytime job were gone. But there was not a single car parked on Boyd, and it is this super wide. Filbert's another one that's very wide. And it did occur to me, we did have somebody, when we did the comp plan implementation that led to the big work group that led to the middle housing code. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, yeah. We did have somebody suggest that we do little neighborhood parking lots Vera's nodding, she remembers this, to address these, places where we get middle housing and there's not enough parking. And that was even before I think before the CFAC took away the ability to do parking. That suggestion was out there. And it did occur to me, could we suggest to people that there are streets that have a lot of space to park? The people on those streets would probably come for my head. But I mean, it does seem to me like we have streets in various areas that have parking, have plenty of parking. Anyway. Yeah.
I think I'm hearing on this one is don't need to race to create a new program. Potentially do some engagement. Let people know about what already exists, even though I know it's not the perfect fit, and we'll kind of monitor. I agree. Okay, last one, trees. This one's kind of already in motion. There's a nuance though. We are already coming back on December 2nd to talk to you about tree code. We're updating some pieces, but the pieces that we talked to you about in July were non-residential tree code, or not, I should say non-development tree code. Based on the feedback we got from the town hall of do whatever you can to protect trees, the question really is, do you want us to come back with proposals for basically strengthening the private development code, which could both be through code and or through fee. So you could make it just even more expensive to remove private development or the trees for development. Is this something you would like to give direction for staff to talk about when we come on the December 2nd?
How often do we see large trees being removed?
Just got an email today. Just recently.
Okay.
You did get an email as we were
Got an email,
talking
yeah.
about one. I don't know the details on it, so I don't want to speculate. I've asked our urban forester to look, and it's on the Shaw development. Some work's being done. I'm not sure what's going on.
Was that development before tree code or was that after tree code?
Tree code came in at the same time as middle housing. We did them both at the same time.
It's about that big tree in the back corner.
And I don't know the details, so I don't really want to speculate. It's got a couple pictures and I'm looking into it.
I do like the idea of coming back and talking about the development tree code as well. I think both merit a look, and I think we heard a lot of thoughts about that.
Any concerns?
Well, I mean, we heard pretty clearly, like, we should charge more, it should be more expensive to remove trees. And I am concerned about, especially, the bigger, more mature trees that we're losing. On the other hand, we had the other conversation about, the fees are too high, right? So I feel like the tree staff is kind of being pulled both ways.
I think how the staff have interpreted the non-direction so far is that what can we do to maybe alleviate burden on non-development tree removals that are maybe around private infrastructure impacts or, those kinds of things, while making it more difficult in the development context. So I think it's a seesaw. And that is something I think our tree staff are very willing to engage and put some proposals forward for.
Yeah, and I would say, that was more geared toward property owners allowing for a reasonable amount of maintenance on their properties, not necessarily for that, but if we're gonna let developers pay like $1,500 to cut a tree down.
Well, it's 4,000 and up.
I'm just saying, even that's right. I mean, they're gonna pay that. And looking at what our tree canopy requirement is, I mean, that And I used $1,500. I think that's what they paid when they took out that tree on the corner of 7 acres. 7 acres was being built. They only paid like $1,500 for that. They weren't supposed to cut that down even, but they did anyways. So I think that's the biggest concern that people have, as opposed to like the property owners being able to maintain their property. So whatever we do, if we increase it, it needs to be exponential, or I would even like to look into getting rid of the fee in lieu of.
Preservation.
I mean, depending on the tree, if you have a tree that massive, because we do, I mean, did we have the whole presentation on how much the trees are worth and the value of those trees? So, I mean, maybe we start asking for more towards what the value of those trees are. Because what are we going to do? Do we think 15,000 is going to change their mind? 20,000? They're going to get triple that in profit for what they're going to build there. They're not, you know what I mean? That's why even with these properties, same thing. You're talking about they're still sitting there. They got $40,000 reduction. Well, they're still making 125% profit. So they have room to spare. So that's the thing. Like if we're going to do that and it's going to be fee, then it needs to be something that's really going to hit them hard, make them think twice, as opposed to just them saying, it's 20 grand. Okay, I'll adjust some things on the project to make that up on the back end.
Well, I think that developers on cost, no matter what, to hire and rent. You know, doesn't matter if it's SDC or tree fee or anything else, that's going to be built into their business plan. And so I think ultimately the consumer pays for it.
Right, but if it's a $60,000 fee, you can't justify that by the market. The market is what dictates the value of a home, not the developer.
I would agree with that.
If they got to pay more, if it's going to cost them more, if that $60,000 fee goes over their budget.
And I should clarify, I don't think we need to decide the fee threshold tonight. It's just, is that the direction you want staff to be kind of moving towards, that seesaw of more to preserve and protect trees during development, maybe a little easier to do some of the maintenance and private.
Yeah, that's moving forward.
Yeah, I'm open to that.
And I would like to see some data from about what trees have been removed for on the development side.
Yes.
And like, what are they? What's the size?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, my friends, then I'm gonna do the quickest recap ever. So, your direction, building separation requirements, we said we want to monitor that through the rulemaking, put a marker for January 2027, but not take any code action on that specific topic until the rulemaking is done. On design standards, we're not going to open the design standard code, but you would like us to come back talking about incentives for things like maximizing open space and green space. And also explore the sideways facing opportunity. Fee lock needs to be its own discussion, maybe a study session. And as part of that, we'll talk about, we can talk about right-of-way maintenance and liability requirements, to your point, Councilor Koster-Body, and these non-remonstrants. I love that word, remonstrants. Parking, a little bit of wait and see, a little bit more engagement. Make sure people know about Reg 470, and we'll be equally communicative with you. If we start getting inundated with, hey, how can we make 470 work in my neighborhood, we'll let you know. And then finally, trees. We're going to bring back on December 2nd, not just stuff on non-development, but also development tree code, and ideas and ways that we could make it harder to remove trees as part of development. Whew.
Super quick, one small thing you missed, the co-housing incentives as well.
Co-housing incentives, thank you. Yep. Great, thank you. Mayor, you want to move right into?
Sure.
So I don't believe Laura's got slides, and the staff part of this will be pretty fast, and then we want to leave time for you all to discuss, so.
Over to you, Laura.
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to, I know that you all brought this to the table to have a discussion about it. So I just thought I would kind of get us up to speed as to where we are at the moment, right? So we kind of had a conversation when we came out of hubs, and it was like, well, what are the next steps for hubs? And we talked about one of the first things that we were going to do is look at the residential high density zone and what barriers might be there. And so on whether or not we should be expanding that. And so that work is being done. Actually, it came out of the hubs, but also came out of our housing reduction strategy. We're actually required by DLCD to look at that through our housing reduction strategy. We have a timeline in which we're supposed to do that. So we're doing that now per our housing production strategy. We just got notified that we got a grant from DLCD to do the work. So basically we're going to get assigned a consultant and we're going to work on the scope of that. And I included the kind of the grant application in your packet so you can see kind of the description there. Then, so we're going to get kicked off with that. Also coming out of hubs, there was a conversation about whether or not we would be doing corridor work on 32nd and King, and we put a pause on that until we had potentially talk about that in 2026. That was what you all agreed on. We also said that we were going to be looking at our temporary use permitting program to see if we can incentivize little farm stands and whatnot that are happening in neighborhoods. We have been working on that or doing that, and we're going to start actually, we've updated the permit, we've updated some information, and then we're going to actually run some articles in the pilot program. And then, in the pilot, so that people know that that exists. And so if they have questions about it, try to promote it a little bit that way. We also said that we were going to do some marketing about, when we did the Hubs project, we told people what the new things were that they could do with their property. But I think that Mayor Beatty brought this up of wanting to go back out and just let people yet again know there are some opportunities to do some new things with their property and doing like a little marketing campaign. We've started putting that together. We just haven't fully executed that yet. So that is in the works. And that's kind of where we left it back when we last talked about this in February of 2025.
So the only other thing was I thought we talked about some placemaking type activities to draw attention to the existing hubs. Some, like banners or some, and I guess maybe this new placemaking grant that the city has is an opportunity for
I
that.
think that's kind of step one, Mayor, but I think there could be more to be done in 26 by our economic development team about, anything the city could do, not just big grant funds available, but for some of that activation in hubs.
Yeah.
And so with that, I guess it's your conversation to be had. We're here and happy to answer questions, participate, but we're really kind of seeking direction. I know that Councilor Anderson has some ideas, and so we're just really here as a sounding board and happy to answer any questions. I don't know what's under discussion.
Well, I was gonna say, I thought when I saw this on the forecaster, I thought you were kicking off the HDR stuff, so we're not quite there yet. So I guess, I'm surprised that we're here. So I guess it is the council president's show to bring up things. I did go back and watch the February meeting, and I think you've recapped it pretty solidly. Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in. I know the mayor sent around my little newsletter. When we look at this item D, the housing production strategy, it gives us 4 little bullets. Some technical changes to the zone and looking at areas that we add into the HDR. I think my ask of us today is that as opposed to just looking at the RHD zone, that we look at expanding mixed-use zones that are comparable to the RHD. So something that is still neighborhood scale, something that is hopefully a more palatable version of development that residents can see. I think that, we just had a middle housing conversation. Middle housing is something that the state has mandated happens everywhere. And I think we have an opportunity here to show we can add more units to the city. It doesn't have to be just density, it can actually be livability. And it doesn't have to happen all over the city. You can really concentrate it in areas where you have infrastructure, areas like hubs that we've already identified, and do maybe more limited forms of growth that hopefully are more palatable to residents as opposed to just more apartments or more density coming in. That's about it.
So, I mean, the thing that we put in the grant money for is, thank you for putting up the map. So we see the map. It's kind of hard to tell the distinction between the colors, but it's that beigey stuff around downtown in historic Milwaukee, around Milwaukee Marketplace, and then over around the King Road Safeway. Oh, and there's some in, oh no, that's,
Is there some in Island Station down
There's
south?
an Island Station, a little bit over in Linwood, a little bit up in.
how is that in Island Station? That's funny, okay. So there's little pockets, but it's not the vast majority of the RMD, which we just, we had the comp plan and we had the housing packet out of that consolidated zones. We used to have more zones and we consolidated them into the RMD and we drew a clear distinction between the RHD and the RMD. I think we have an obligation, and we have a housing production strategy, and we said we would take on the RMD as one of the early steps in that. This thing you're talking about is a huge thing. That is a huge lift. That is a huge community conversation, as opposed to a more discrete conversation with people in more discrete areas.
I guess our HPS item D says we should look at opportunities to add more land into the high density residential zone. And I think
What page are you on?
I'm on page, 48 of the housing production strategy. But let me see where that is in the packet.
Yeah, and we did actually include a little bit of that language in the grant proposal, that we wanted to know whether or not, kind of like, what are the barriers that we have for redevelopment in our RHD now? And are the barriers something that we're not going to be able to overcome through zoning changes? Or so do we potentially need to look beyond the boundaries of the RHD zone? But it would be, we have to answer that question first. I think that was part of the analysis, was to understand, are there going to be some things that we can do to unlock the RHD? And if there aren't, if we don't see any way to do that, then should we be thinking about looking at other places where it would be good to start a community conversation?
Yeah.
Can you give me, paint a picture
Yeah.
of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that you could. So I guess what I would say is, if we're talking about where we expand RHD, I would imagine, based on what's here in the map, there's a lot in our town center. There's a lot that's surrounding our neighborhood hubs. There's some that follows transit lines. I'd imagine that if we're talking about expanding RHD, we do something similar. You extend it down transit lines. In some areas, you extend it. Maybe you do a little more of a concentric ring around a neighborhood hub. And I guess I would just say that if we're going to have this conversation about adding more buildable land to be able to meet the goal in our housing production strategy, I think it's more appropriate to talk about mixed use zones that are more livable and more appealing to our residents, as opposed to just apartment zones. And really, I think if you asked our residents, do you want to see us focus on getting more large apartment buildings versus allowing more neighborhood scale mixed use zones that helps meet the letter of the housing production strategy? I think that people are going to want to see more of the latter.
Go ahead.
It seemed like all of those emails that came in were against middle housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. I think that we have so much money that people are going to pour into development in the city. And I think that people who are emailing in are saying, encourage the type of development that we want to see, more mixed use zones, more things that are more walkable and accessible in places where they should be, next to infrastructure that can support them, as opposed to our current law, which is allowing middle housing all across the city. So I'm saying, if we're thinking about what type of development strategy we're going to have as a city, being a little more targeted about where encouraging and allowing development, as opposed to right
I did see some of those. I saw some letters and emails that were just flat out against, middle housing in general.
Yeah.
Well, or more, yeah.
There were 9 letters in support of adding more mixed use zones. 1 letter in opposition, and then 1 letter that had some questions about Would this actually work? Would there be vacant storefronts? What would that look like?
Yeah. I do like the idea of less giant apartments. And I'm curious to know, like, I wonder if, I'd like to have the conversation because I'm curious to know if that's what would maybe spurn some of the developments in the neighborhood hubs or some of that development that we've been, hubs are going on over a decade, right?
Yeah.
And those are already zoned for mixed use.
Right, and I'm wondering.
And they
like,
haven't had it, right?
Well, I would also
Oh.
say, so our hubs, SMU is a good example. So if you see that light purple, a fun challenge, where on the map do we have light purple? If you guessed only 4 lots in the city, you would be correct. And 2 of those lots are right next to each other at the Little Blue Store. And so in terms of our SMU, which I think is a great tool to allow for more neighborhood sale, it's the same height limit as our RMD, our residential medium density. I think that that's a great tool to allow more mixed use activity in our neighborhoods. More apartments are also coming in with that, or condos are coming in with that. So you have more housing as well. But it's just happening in a way that's more palatable than middle housing. And the challenge that I'd say is also, to your point, Councilor Christopher, our neighborhood hub that happens at Sunnyside Market is literally predicated on only Sunnyside Market can redevelop. There's nothing else around it that would redevelop into a neighborhood hub. So if we want to be thinking about, okay, what does it look like to build neighborhood hubs? I think you're totally right. We need to not put all our eggs in one Sunnyside Market lot basket, but looking at other spots in that area that we define as a hub.
So are you saying you want to increase the number of those of zones that allow mixed use as opposed to, okay.
I think
So that's the change. You're not changing code necessarily. You're just adding zones.
Yeah.
Well, you're adding properties into.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which would
You're
be-
necessarily changing code.
Yeah, as opposed
The
to,
applying code.
Right.
Well, the
as
two
opposed to-
Areas.
The 2 examples you just gave, Sunny Market and Little Blue Store, were just, I don't know about Little Blue Store, but Sunny Market and, those were just added. Those were our latest round. So it's not like they've had long, but it's also like we had an opportunity to talk about them and we didn't do it then. We created this neighborhood mixed use.
yeah.
We have empty spaces downtown. We have a lot of empty spaces at Milwaukie Marketplace. Both King Road and Wichita have for lease signs up, so I guess they have empty spaces or are anticipating them. I think it's part of the conversation we had back in February. We are creating these opportunities that, like 32nd has been an opportunity for 10 years and nothing's happened. And if it does, is it cannibalizing from other places in the city? So, we talked in February about a financial feasibility or economic feasibility work kind of coming on the heels of this RHD work. And to me, that makes perfect sense. And that to rezone now, to create new nodes or to expand existing nodes is, it's a big conversation with all the neighborhoods and all the people around them. It's a much bigger lift, I think, for staff than just the pure RHD. And it'll be it'll be slower.
When we had the conversation in February, I was a proponent of limiting the number of votes. Because I just thought we were going to get, when we were talking about 5 or 6 hubs, I think it was, the round number that we talked about. I just want to see if we can win with 1 or 2, and we haven't yet. So I want to, it requires a lot of focus and that kind of thing, I think, to succeed here. And I think that expanding this thing is just going to, from my view, you have less opportunity for success of anything, rather than what my propose is focus on what we've already identified.
I guess I'd say 2 things. One is, if we were talking about rezoning where we waved a magic wand and it was changed today, I think I would agree that it is too early to see zone changes happen in our hubs. But I think eventually, like I've identified, the fact that some of our hubs literally only have 1 lot that we're putting all of our eggs in is a little too small. We're going to need more to a hub than just one lot and bank on that one lot developing. So I think that at some point we have to have a conversation around zoning. This year, we're going to have conversations. We just detailed them all the placemaking work and the ECDEV goal plan. We have work done and scheduled to support, like you're saying, Robert, 1 or 2 hubs to really see them start to pop. I don't see the timeline for this happening. Like, frankly, I don't think we would even start scoping exactly the specifics of this work until probably after the budget cycle, when we have time to talk about what the actual needs of this type of large scale venture would look like. But I want
So are
to
you
stress.
suggesting a second thing after the RHD, or are you suggesting holding the RHD off until?
I think even well, this is the thing. You're acting like RHD is wave a wand and done, but adding any zones is going to be, if you had to add RHD zone, that would be a long, intensive process into adding.
What do you mean? We have an RHD zone. What's
Adding land into the RHD zone, yeah, which is a component of our housing production strategy. I guess what I'm trying to say.
Explore the opportunity of whether or not we need to do that. And so I think it would be a tiered approach. So I think that we would do the RHD study to see, first of all, what we could do to remove barriers. What could we do to stimulate it? And if we don't have any tools in our toolbox to do that, then we would have a discussion about whether or not we should be expanding the RHD zone. So it's kind of like in tiers, right? It's kind of like, let's get through this first barrier analysis. Then it's like, do we need to have other areas that we would expand into? And then there's still also the conversation from holdover from last time is the corridor studies on 32nd and King. So I don't know where, like how that fits into it. Are we going to do those, or would we do something? I'm just trying to get an understanding of the idea of how you're thinking of work, like, or what you're proposing, I guess.
What I'm thinking about here then, to say it specifically, I think you do kind of a few different things, even tying some of the middle housing stuff. I think you look at technical fixes that you have to do to make our RHD zones pop and see are there other technical fixes that are needed. One example that I'll throw out is if we're talking about expanding our SME zone, I think it would make sense to have single family homes be allowed it by right as opposed to as a conditional use, to just make it more palatable to spread that zone in more spots. So small tweaks like that, I think you still do. When it comes to the conversation about adding lands in different zones, adding parcels into existing zones, I think we look at some of that corridor work and hub work that you're talking about and do about that and say, okay, what's required in the RHD that is in our housing production strategy, as opposed to just doing RHD work, saying, okay, are there other ways that we can satisfy the spirit of this housing production item, adding more units that we can do through mixed use, as opposed to just large scale apartments that are allowed in the RHD. And then I think you also get an opportunity as you look at this to say, are there incentives as we're looking at these zones that we want to look at? I think we mentioned some of them today in the middle housing town hall. We talked about incentives for green space. We talked about incentives for cohabiting. I think I'd also circle back to what Councilor Khosrowshahi alluded to. Are there incentives for looking at ways that we can encourage condos in our RHD zones and mixed use zones outside of just the one condo incentive that we have in our affordable housing code? So I think as we look at all this, you can kind of peek under the hood and see, are there ways, as we're trying to allow more growth in line with our housing production strategy, that we're allowing the right growth, the type of growth that our residents want to see?
That was a lot.
I mean, that's already in our plan.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
It's not in our, it's.
The component that isn't in our plan is doing mixed use. The component that is in our plan is doing RHD apartments. And so all I'm saying is, as we do this existing work plan, making sure that mixed use is a part of the conversation as well, not just apartments.
So basically in the RHD, you'd have a choice of, hey, you can either build these big apartments that nobody really wants, right? Or you can build something of a mixed use on a smaller scale that's got like 6 units above it as opposed to 160. But there's mixed use on the bottom, like that smaller, is that kind of?
I think what you're also describing there is, are there zones? So our NMU and our RHD are kind of similar. They have the same height limit, similar statistics. Are there areas in our RHD that maybe should be zoned NMU? I think when you have a conversation like that, you totally could kind of swap them out. So it's also looking at areas that we have allowed certain types of development. We want to allow mixed use development.
Can I ground truth something with Laura? So the grant that we've got and the way that you envision this RHD project being scoped. Step one is you just look at the beige that we've got right now, like do the analysis. Are we getting the best bang for our buck on that? That takes a certain amount of time. Then I think what you're saying, Council President, is phase two. If the answer to that is no, or sorry, if the answer to that is yes, you've done everything you can here, then it's look to expand. And Council President, you're advocating for don't expand RHD, instead look at expanding NMU, SMU, because that is more the type of development that people want to see in neighborhoods. Is that, I guess, kind of question one is that accurate? And then I guess question to Laura is if DLCD or the grant, comes back as you've got all these things you can do in RHD, like, is there necessarily that second phase? And is that what we're looking for direction from council on? You should definitely do a second phase.
Yeah, I think that we don't necessarily we haven't determined whether we need a second phase yet. I think that's the question,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so I think that maybe if we were going to do the second phase of work, I don't know that we're getting that phase of work done through this grant. Like that would actually
Yes.
be the next phase that we would need to understand, like what we would need to do and scope it, and whether or not there'd be another grant or whether we just, hire a consultant. Because it's really, the other thing, it goes back to its market analysis. Like we haven't seen mixed use development in a lot of places because the market isn't there yet, right? And so I always imagined that it would be, I know that we talked to the table, that prime real estate, prime corridors are King Road stretching, because it's really, if you think about corridors, I mean, that's the way that if you look at Portland, and not to say that Portland's an example, but they use the whole corridor process, right? For roads that connect from big places to other places, right? Because that's where you're gonna have the most thoroughfare. People are coming and going from out there, right? So I feel like just putting more neighborhood mixed use, popping them down into neighborhoods, I just don't know that the market is going to play that out. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe in 20 years it will. It's the same thing is true of corridors, right? Like if you look at a place like Division, you put that plan in place, it takes 20 years for that whole thing to transform itself, right? That took a long time. So to me, I think that we can look at what it could look like, but I would suggest thinking about it from the corridor perspective, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, because you've already, like King Road, we're improving King Road, we're making it better for cyclists, we're making it better for bicyclists, we're going to make improvements for transit there. And you already have kind of existing corridor, it kind of ties from one end of the city down to the next. And then if you look at 32nd, we talked about this before, 32nd also ties in down to the greater core, right? And you can even think about that stretch of Harrison, that comes down from Safeway, right? That is another kind of vein that starts to tie everything together. And in my mind, that is where you're going to probably see the most likelihood of people moving through the city, both residents and people that live outside of the city. You're just going to have more traffic and more opportunities for people to stop and purchase things. But I even believe that the 32nd and King Avenue, that's 20 years down the road. We can do the corridor planning now. I don't think much will happen. Yeah, because we've had 32nd for 10 years. Nothing has happened. I love the idea of all neighborhoods having these things that are walkable. I just don't know the feasibility of it from an economic standpoint. Small businesses, which are the businesses that you're going to get and mixed use, they're even struggling or having a hard time, I think, in our own downtown now. Like we're really trying to build up that space for people. And so I think that I just don't know if you get the people that would want to be out there sprinkled in the neighborhoods. It seems like you'd want them more in concentrated areas.
And I want to clarify, I'm not saying plop NMU in the middle of Linwood. I'm saying there are spots like King Road, like 32nd, that have transit, have infrastructure that we're building, PSP and other plans, have already some existing mixed use. We talk about expanding where we're adding more housing. I think that those areas make sense to allow mixed use development, not just larger apartments.
Yeah, sure, for sure. That's part of the whole, that's the whole corridor analysis. We just haven't gotten there yet. I think that's part of the conversation. Yeah.
And this is where I would say there's a lot of engagement that has to happen with business leaders in our neighborhoods. There's engagement that has to happen with neighborhoods. There's engagement that has to happen with the city and residents and a bunch of different places. And I think this is a part of that larger kind of engagement process. That's, I guess, why I say I don't see this happening until after the next budget is developed. But I do think that that type of this initial groundwork that we're doing to lay the foundation for our hubs, I'm not presuming that you change the zone and it changes overnight, but laying the foundation for our hubs as opposed to just allowing large scale apartment development through our RHD work, I think is going to be more palatable for people.
So that's where I want to ground truth. Why, there seems to be an assumption that RHD is going to be all about large-scale apartments. And so I wanted to ask you guys sort of, what is there between, I mean, first off, there's obviously sort of garden apartments and smaller apartments. But what are the things that are, not allowed in the RMD under middle housing, but could be allowed in the RHD? Why should we be assuming that it's all about big apartment buildings?
I didn't have that assumption built into my mind that that's what it was going to be, that we were going to explore some more options of that.
Okay. So, I mean, there are some things like, the things that are allowed as middle housing, but maybe would be allowed a little more intense, like townhomes or something. Yeah.
All that stuff is allowed in the RHD zone now, of course. I mean, the biggest difference is from a residential standpoint is multi-unit development, but that can be a 7 acres kind of thing, but it can also just be 10 apartments. I mean, anything 5 units or more is considered multifamily. So it could be anything in between. And that's all going to depend on the lot configuration of a property. I mean, 7 acres is literally 7 acres. I mean, you need big properties. So a lot of aggregation would have to happen. I mean, we have apartment developments along King Road, sort of scooted back there. And, those are 25, 30 apartments, but they fit in because they're low scale too. They're 2-story.
There's only been a lot of those in historic Milwaukie.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a scale standpoint. It's not even just the number of units. There's a scale of just the buildings themselves, and they're just not that tall either. So that helps them fit in.
So for example, that development example I gave with the 6 units on top, would that be allowable right now in RHD with like, let's say, shops on the block?
Yeah, because we already allow some commercial development. When we consolidated the RHD, we also brought in some of the uses that are permitted there. We could probably look into a little bit more about that because right now it's office and personal services, so salons and that kind of thing. We took a baby step in kind of allowing a little bit more sort of development. So we could look at a little bit more of that and kind of make mixed use a more deliberate kind of development type. And I think,
in the RHD,
in the RHD, and then thinking about right now the NMU multifamily, just multi-unit development is a conditional use. The idea was that we really wanted to incentivize mixed use, but that has resulted in we don't have any multi-unit development in the NMU either because. So I think just from not getting wonky, but sort of the idea of what's allowed by right, what's not, and kind of look at all of that to figure out. Yeah. And so if somebody wants to do mixed use, they could. If they want to do just multi-unit, they could. I mean, so we can do that. I think it's going to be more about scale than it is about the number of units, I think.
Yeah.
And I guess we're kind of getting in the weeds here. I'll abstract back out. I think we have to do technical work, like what you're describing. I think that a component of that is looking at what are permitted uses, conditional uses, what types of uses allowed, what tweaks we have to make in RHD. When it comes to adding land to zones, I think that we should look at making sure that we're expanding not just our high density zones, but also mixed use zones. And then baking in the incentives that we've already talked about here today. And seeing are there other types of growth that we want to see that fits with what neighbors want to see.
Well, so I will say I'm not sure what timelines you're putting all those on, but I'm all for getting the RHD work going as soon as you can get the grant going. And then when we see that and when we do the economic development, the economic, whatever it is, prognosis work around the hubs, around the corridors, then we talk about those other things.
When, I guess, would that be done?
Well, it's a slow roll. We are a small department, we have small staff, and we have a lot going on. So basically, we have to look at And we've had a lot of change, to be fair. We've been down a planner for quite some time, actually. So we're just kind of coming out of all of that. We have a lot of things going on in our department. So I'm just trying to lay the groundwork, trying to be a reality here. So I would say that the RHT stuff, obviously we're on the DLCD timeline because we're working with them. And so we haven't heard back even to get our consultant on board yet. But I would assume that kind of the DLCD work would happen from the time that we get it kicked off, that it would happen probably a year. I mean, I'm thinking that we probably have a year, and then we could understand what was coming out of that. And so then whatever work gets defined out of that, we would have a conversation with you all and decide like, okay, so what is our next step here? And then I think that we have to decide when we want to put in the corridor work, or if that's like part contingent on whatever comes out of the high density residential work. So I can't say that all of it, when it's going to happen. And I also would just like the caveat. I mean, I think all this is really interesting. We're a really small community, and people can only process so much when you have these multiple. So it's better to stagger the work than to have multiple things going on at once in this particular space, because there's a lot of changes already happening, and then we're talking about more change. And so and people have only so much engagement they can do around these things. So we have to kind of stagger the work. We can't do it all at once. We have to do like a roll out of it, because it's a small staff, small community, and we have to have lots of conversations with the community to kind of do any of the work, which is all doable. I just want to be sure that we do it wisely and on a timeline that people have the capacity for.
Yeah.
And I mean the community, not the staff.
I guess I was asking, the market analysis of the hubs is on our ECDEV work plan for this upcoming corridor. That is feasibly when the market study would happen this winter.
The feasibility study, I'm sorry, something with economic development?
So on the ECDEV work plan, it mentions the market feasibility study that Mayor Beatty is referring to happens this winter. Is that?
I cannot speak to that because I'm not, I have to check in with Joseph and Emma, because I don't know the work plan for economic development. But yeah, it would be good to understand like how those cross-pollinate, for sure.
And I guess based on the ECDEV work plan, it's happening this winter. Your presupposition that we do that market study before we look at any code work, I think fits in with the timeline that you're describing. I think it's important that in this goal cycle, hubs and corridors happen. I'm not saying that we do all of this work right now as soon as we leave, but I think that as a component of that, making sure that we're scoping into the technical fixes, hub work and corridor work, making sure that when we talk about zones, we're talking about mixed use hubs and corridors, and making sure that as we talk about incentives, we're thinking about hubs and corridors too. I guess what I'm saying is integrating the hubs and corridors in a timeline that makes sense for all the other RHD and other work that's happening is the appropriate step that we should do.
I'm not sure where that leaves us. Do you feel like you know where that leaves us?
I guess maybe here's what I would say. It sounds like there is more scoping work that has to be done, thoughts about how we engage the community and what this looks like. The clarity that maybe we get is there consensus here to do some type of integrating the hubs and corridors into our, for this rezoning? I think that's one. No from you.
No, I think we need to do the RHD as its own thing, the way we talked about back in February. I'm not for, as Laura indicated, there are things that will follow from that. But I'm not for muddying these waters by starting to talk about, and muddying how many more people you have to talk with, right? Muddying how much more of the city you have to engage by starting to talk about these other pieces as part of the RHT work.
Yeah. I guess I would disagree. I think that it makes sense if we're talking about expanding our RHD in apartments to also have a conversation about mixed use zones that can happen at some point within the goal period that we set forth, the timeline that makes sense with other planning work that's set forward.
What is the goal period that you're talking about?
The 3-year goal period.
Till 2027? Well, I think we can have it by 2027. I mean, we're talking about 2026 for the RHD work.
I thought it was already outlined on the work plan, the phasing for hubs.
Yeah.
We already have that on our work plan.
So we kind of, at a high level talked about shifting the focus, we did a lot of, and this also spans ECDev and affordability. So on the ECDev work plan, we talked about this year being downtown, next year, 2026, being economic development work in hubs and corridors. And then 2027 was sort of wrap it all up. Affordability was more affordable housing code this year. RHD and density kind of starting now. And then I think what council president's kind of asking is there like in 2026, what's the overlap between the economic development work that's going to happen, hubs and corridors, and planning work? And I think that Laura's going to need a year to do this RHD work. I think that we can come back with more specifics from the economic development team on economic development work that can happen on corridors. That then, once the RHD work wraps, could dovetail nicely potentially into future planning work. I think, but Council President, I'm putting words in your mouth too, is that?
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is, so our ECDev work plan doesn't have any type of planning or zoning work clearly outlined for our neighborhood hubs. And I'm saying that that should be a component of the conversation in this school cycle. And I think that as we have this conversation, it makes sense to also have a conversation about hubs sometime before the end of 27. And so I think what I'm trying to get a sense of is that something that people agree with? That's direction it would give, or is that not?
Would you need to have all those conversations for us in order for us to talk about what it would look like?
I think,
Because you're referring to going out to the neighborhoods and all that.
Well, I'm saying when you're talking about the RHD zone, you're talking about a limited part of Milwaukie. When you're talking about going out and doing, and when you're talking about corridors, you're talking about still a limited but bigger part of Milwaukie. But when you're talking about adding mixed-use zones, spot adding them around the city, that's a big conversation, I think. I mean, I think all of them are big conversations. But
I guess
I think by 2027, I mean, if this work, RHD work, happens in 2026, by 2027, and I will tell you, I'm hopeful that if we do a little economic development and placemaking around 32nd in particular, with the addition of 400 more housing units that are coming in there, that we will see some transition on 32nd in the next few years.
And I'd really love to study that corridor and make sure that we have a plan in place to do exactly what we want over the next 20 years. Because we have the NMU in place, but we haven't done any, how are we improving 32nd? How are we getting right of way? We need to have a whole kind of plan for that.
And one of the questions that has come up is that we have NMU on one side of the street and not the other.
There's a whole big conversation to be had on 32nd, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess in that assumption, if you're tweaking RHD, it happens in a finite zone. That assumes that all we have to do in RHD is technical fixes. There isn't the adding lands into the RHD zone. My point here is more, you've already described, maybe there is some zoning changes that we need to make on 32nd. Do we add both sides in? My point is, there is technical work that we should think about in terms of our neighborhood hubs and mixed-use zones. There's also adding land work that we should describe in our hubs and our neighborhood corridors. And if we're talking about adding in zones or adding in land to the RHD, I think it makes sense to also have a conversation about adding in land to the neighborhood hubs and corridors or whatever it might be. I think there's, like you talked about, Councilor Christopher, more work that has to be done to actually scope this, have conversations with neighbors, figure out exactly what this looks like.
And I think that we will be better prepared to have those conversations once the RHD and the economic sort of analysis piece have been done. We're not in a place right now where we have the info to have knowledgeable conversations about how much it makes sense to add mixed use to neighborhoods. We just aren't.
I think that what I'm saying is we should build out a full planning work plan that looks at how we get this work done by the end of this goal period. And I think that that's a conversation that has to involve our RHD zones, has to involve the market analysis and a bunch of other factors. I totally agree. But I think it's important to get this work done in this goal period. And I'm not supposing that this work, when I talk about hubs and rezoning, has to happen in 2026 necessarily. But I also don't think that, like, if we're talking about expanding zones in RHD, that should be the only conversation we have. Because if we're talking about adding more area into RHD, I think we should also be having a conversation about adding other types of zones that aren't just large scale apartments that people might not be wanting to see. And so what I'm saying is, let's build a work plan that allows us to do this work. If tier 2 or whatever the next step of RHD work is not a guarantee, let's pencil in doing other work then as well, so it could all happen in concert. And that, I think you've described, wouldn't happen until the end of 26, 27.
Yeah, we'd have to just look at it overall because we also have other work on the work plan. And so we just have to have we'd have to think about it.
And we have other commitments in the housing production strategy.
I think what we can commit to is bringing back, and we can look at whether this makes sense as part of either an upcoming ECDEV or affordability update or as a standalone item, is a proposal for that planning work plan that tries to take the, we'll be honest, slightly wishy-washy direction on things like hubs, corridors, RHD, economic analysis, and tries to lay it out for you in a timeline. And I think we can do that. Again, I'll work with my leads on if we can do that as part of one of our upcoming goal updates or if it's going to need its own standalone thing. But seeing that might help us get just a clearer direction from you all on yes, or move that building block here, or who's leading which pieces of that. I think that's kind of what we can get to tonight.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having a conversation, just because I just feel like it isn't a bad thing just to talk about it, right? Especially I get the data, we need that. But I don't think necessarily it prevents us from having a conversation about it. I don't think we have to have it as extensive, especially if we're already revisiting RHC, but if it's really up to how staff can.
Staff needs to know how to move forward, right, with the RHD piece.
So I guess
And are we asking them to slow down because we're trying to add other things to it? Are we saying run with it as fast as DCLD will sign off on your?
I think that as part of the grant, we only have certain things that we're requesting. That doesn't mean that we can say, hey, there's this idea that has been floated around that maybe there's an opportunity to do some work outside of the RHD and expand the other zones, but.
So maybe here's what I would say. I think my point is, to me, it's important that we do this hub preparation work in this goal period. And I think that this is an opportunity where we could ask for more money from DLCD, from Metro, from other partners to be able to supplement this type of work. And so I think it's worthwhile to reach out to DLCD to see if that's a possibility, to have a conversation about what our planning work plan looks like to be able to allow this work to happen and to go from there. Is that something that there might be consensus on?
How's that for staff?
I think that's helpful, but I still don't know what this hubs or corridor work is. So I think we do need another conversation with you all to provide clearer direction about what that hubs and corridor work is. I think that if I just summarize for tonight, like, I think it's go forward with phase 1 of the DLCD work. We do this analysis of the existing RHD. Before we embark on any work to expand the RHD, we need to be having a conversation with you all about if we're going to be expanding zones in the city, what zones are we expanding and how are we doing that work? And I think you've told us there's general interest in hubs corridor focus of that conversation. So we need to, but we just, I do have to go, there's a personnel thing going on.
Yeah.
So,
I need a break too.
I think we're just gonna need more time to discuss that. And I think we can work on getting that onto the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll have to.
I trust that you share the values around the goals that we put in place and that you are looking for opportunities at any point to be able to expand or to make changes around the things that are best for the city. So I think what I'm looking for is just a continuation of that active discussion. And I'm absolutely thrilled that you are in the positions that you're in right now.
Yeah, no. We skipped over that, but congratulations.
Yeah, definitely.
Congratulations.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Even if our agenda didn't have it right,
I
her
know.
name tag had
Of
it.
course Scott got it right.
Well, I was the
Okay.
planner then.
The agenda was published when you were still the senior planner.
Oh, was it?
What?
All right, we are adjourned.
All I just need to say